Welcome back to Vendetta Sports Media. This is the third episode of the Eight Sided Freaks podcast. And today we've got a fight card to talk about, which is an interesting fight card because there's some positives about this fight card. There's some negatives, but there are some compelling fights that are worthy to talk about. So we're going to start off with that. And then afterwards, we've got some UFC 300 announcements. It's not the main event, nothing main card, but some impactful fights and some impactful news as well with a new signing. And then at the end, if we have time, we're going to touch a little bit on the retirement of Frankie Edgar. Or excuse me, the him being inducted into the Hall of Fame. He's been retired for a while now. But that is the docket for today. Jerry, you looking forward to this weekend's card? And what are your thoughts leading into this?
Yeah, we had a weekend off. I was kind of surprised, as we were discussing earlier before we started the show, that we didn't have a card at fall right after a pay-per-view. I thought they might have done one, then taken a break. But nonetheless, UFC is back this weekend. Definitely a spicier card than we have in 2 weekends' time. So I'm excited for this. There's some entertaining fights, some fights that I know very little about, honestly, some guys that are kind of up and coming and all that. So should be fun to watch and should be some good stuff.
Yeah, we've got a pretty good balance of types of fights on this card. You've got your ranked fights, you've got some prospects, you've got some fighters kind of in the middle of the road. So there's a lot of diversity on this card, just based on the type of fighters that we're seeing. We're going to talk about the last four fights, so the main event and the three fights below it. Three of those are ranked fighters, and then the other two are relatively household names, both longer stints in the UFC. All right, so let's start it off with the main event. Roman Dolidze versus Nassoudine Imavov. This is a really interesting fight, in my opinion. And I kind of want to start with how important this fight is, because I think a lot of times the importance in a fight between a guy that's ranked 8th and 11th kind of gets swept under the rug. But when you're looking at these guys, both prospects who have cracked into the rankings, Dolidze, 35 years old, so he's kind of needs to, if he wants to chase the title, I don't want to say now or never, but we got to start moving up those ranks. Nassoudine Imavov, not 30 yet, so he's got a little bit more time, but when you look at this, it's Dolidze, who's coming off a loss to Vettori, and it is Imavov, who's coming off a no contest over Chris Curtis, which, in all honesty, probably would have been a win. And then before that was a loss to Sean Strickland. So both of these guys need a win here badly. A win keeps them in the top 10. What are your thoughts on this fight, just for the stakes that are had and your opinions on these two going in?
I think it's big. Like you said, these two guys are kind of on that fringe of really breaking into a really interesting middleweight division, into like the top 7, 8 in that part. I don't know how I feel about the result of this fight. I think Dolidze, you said it. He's 35 now. This is his last real chance. With the guys who are up around him, there's Paulo Costa, Vettori, Cannonier. He's one rank ahead of Hamzat, right behind Brendan Allen. So there's all these young guys that are coming up that you could see make waves and end up deserving title shots in this 185 division. So I think this is a must win for Dolidze. If not, I think his title aspirations will be done for.
Wow. That's a big statement, but I think it's fair considering his age. And I believe we talked about this a little bit after Duplessis and Strickland won the belt. But this middleweight division, and this is something I feel very strongly about, is going to undergo a lot of turnover just because of the age and miles on the tire of some of these guys in the top 5 to 10. In comparison to some of these guys coming up that are very talented, like Dolidze and Imavov. Even though Dolidze is older, he's still relatively new, doesn't have a lot of miles on the tire. And then you've got Imavov, talented young guy, Pfeiffer, who's fighting next week against Jack Hermanson. So that's a big fight for this division. So very quickly, we could see a lot of turnover. And in order to put yourself in a positive position to be one of the guys that when there's turnover, you come up at the top. You need both of these guys need to win this fight. Otherwise, you're on the flip side of that, and now you're fighting someone ranked in between 10 and 15, or maybe even an unranked guy. So now you're on the other side of things, and now you're the stepping stone. So this fight probably could make up a year and a half of fight time for both guys. Like if you lose, it could take 2, maybe even 3 fights to get back to this point. So about a year and a half of fight time for the guy who loses this fight. So I think this is a really, really impactful fight, and I think that's always an important thing to note. Because I think things like that get swept under the rug, like I said earlier, especially when it's not, number 1 versus number 3 or 3 versus 4 in the rankings.
Yeah, it's still very impactful. I mean, it should be a very entertaining fight. Prior to his loss against Marvin Vettori, Roman Dolidze had 3 straight knockouts. So he knows how to go in there. And it wasn't against bad guys. He beat Jack Hermanson, Phil Hawes, Kyle Dawkins at times. So it's like not the worst competition you could have by any means. So he's looked good. And I hadn't honestly realized he's only has 14 professional MMA fights. So that is a good sign that maybe this isn't necessarily the end of the road. I just think with everything else going on in the middleweight division, this is a must-win for him for any title shots upcoming.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And looking into the career of Dolidze a little bit, he started MMA real late, and he's made a lot of improvements post the age of 30, which is not really something you always see, but you can see it when a guy starts later. And Dolidze is a good example. And I've been really impressed with some of his skills. Like when you look at that Jack Hermanson fight, he's got taken down. The finishing sequence, he gets taken down and then threatens submissions to eventually get to a calf slicer, and then uses that calf slicer to hold Hermanson in place and get a ground and pound. It's like that's a very unique finish and some unique grappling that we don't really see a lot of guys in MMA who can use those leg locks to get to good positions. It's just rare. A lot of times guys are on bottom and they get punched in the face when you try a leg lock. See Ryan Hall versus Ilia Topuria. It's a great example of you try the heel hook and you end up getting knocked out. Dolidze is a guy who can actually do leg locks, and it has kind of molded them to be useful for MMA. He's not necessarily doing them straight jiu-jitsu wise. So credit to him for that. And he's got, like you mentioned, he has a lot of power on the feet. He's got knockout power. And like that Phil Hawes fight, he pops like Phil Hawes' knee. He's got Phil Hall all in a world of trouble, gets the finish on the feet. So he's just a very dangerous guy, whether you're striking or grappling. So that's just one thing that I like about Dolidze that I wanted to throw out there, that on the ground, he might tear your ACL, and on the feet, he might knock you out. So I think there's a lot of impressive skills for Dolidze, which makes me very interested in this fight.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of that power comes from the fact that he really only went to the middleweight division in his 3rd UFC fight. He was a heavyweight when he first started, heel hook submission there, moved to light heavyweight, first fight, another heel hook. So those leg locks that you're talking about, it's just dangerous already, and he had it from the get-go. And I'm sure he's only improved in that aspect, but dropping from heavyweight, even if it was in 2016, you keep the power.
Mm-hmm.
And he's definitely shown that. As far as Imavov goes, that Chris Curtis fight was interesting. I do agree with you. I think he was probably losing that before the clash of heads caused it to be a no contest. Then that Sean Strickland one, that was a light heavyweight on I don't want to know. I can't remember. Was it short notice?
It was a short notice for Strickland. I don't remember who Imavov was supposed to fight, but his opponent pulled out, and Strickland stepped in because that was when he lost to Cannonier in December and then turned around and fought Imavov in January.
Now, the headline, he was meant to fight Kelvin Gastelum. That's who he was meant to fight for that card.
Very different fight, Kelvin Gastelum and Sean Strickland in his defense.
And I think that kind of ended up being a bit of the issue, was he wasn't prepared for what Sean Strickland was throwing at him. Went the distance. Strickland does what he does and gets the decision, apart from 2 weekends ago, I guess. But still, and I mean, wins before that don't entirely impress me all that much. It was Joaquin Buckley, Edmund Shabazan, and Ian Helmshich. he lost to Phil Hawes, who we saw Roman Dolidze put to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
It's if you go off head-to-heads of guys they fought, definitely taking the advantage Dolidze, and I do think he does get it done. I think
Yeah.
he's a little more wise, a little more powerful, and has that going. But can
Mm-hmm.
never count out any guy from Dagestan, even if Imanov fights for France.
Yeah. Um, I agree with you. I think Dolidze wins. And my thinking here was I originally thought Imavov was going to win. Thought about it a little bit more, switched to Dolidze. And my reasoning for that was I originally liked Imavov because he's very good fighting from a distance, good jab, good kicks. And in this fight, he could probably sit on the outside, land some jabs, land some body kicks. Maybe that wears into the later rounds if he's really landing into the body well. But then I just think about that Phil Hawes fight. And he lost that Phil Hawes fight by being controlled up against the fence for north of 10 minutes. I believe Phil Hawes had more than 10 minutes of control time. And that is just like, I just can't get that out of my mind when you're going up against Dolidze, who is a dangerous grappler, has knees from the clinch. And it's like, I have serious concerns about Imavov's grappling. We'll see how we'll see how much Dolidze attempts takedowns. His last two fights have been against Hermanson and Vittori. Not exactly the guys that you go out there and offensively wrestle.
Yeah.
Now he's getting a little bit of a different fight, more of a pure striker. So this would be the time he kind of turns up the wrestling offense. And if he does that, I think he can get this win. From a betting perspective, he's like a plus 150 underdog, which I think is really surprising considering he is a fighter that has more finish upside, probably better cardio, and for sure better grappling. It's like, to me, it feels this is a very weird fight where a lot of people are picking Imavov when there are some very like flashing red light signs to pick Dolidze. So I'm going with Dolidze just because I can't get that image of Phil Hawes holding him up against the fence out of my mind when he should have beaten Phil Hawes. That's a very winnable fight, especially for a good striker. So I have to go with Dolidze just because I trust his grappling more.
Yeah, I mean, I could see this very much being a submission finish. It'd be Dolidze's first one since his third fight. His first three MMA fights, all submissions. Hasn't had one since. So I think he's due. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, that's a good point. And he is he's a very good submission artist for not having submissions that long. So I could see that. I also wouldn't be surprised if he wins a decision. I think a lot of people are just going to assume he can't win a decision since he has more finish upside, which I don't think is true. So a decision would not shock me either.
I think for Imanov, if he is to win, I think it might have to grind out a decision. But at the same time, with that being said, Dolidze's never been finished, so that would be quite something to see.
Yeah, I could if maybe we could always this is one of the things that you never know about picking fights. I picked Dolidze because he's a better grappler. What if he goes out there and shoots 0 takedowns?
Yeah,
it's like that's a real possibility because not everyone fights to their strengths. So that's always something to remember. So maybe Imavov does get it done and controls this fight from the outside, just not the most confident outcome, in my opinion.
Yeah. No,
all right. Moving down the card, we have Renato Moicano versus Drew Dober. This is a fight number, I believe it's 13 and 15 in the lightweight rankings, and both of these guys are kind of in this range. Like, these are guys who I'm not sure we ever see Moicano or Dober crack into the top 10. If they do, it's probably going to be a squeak into the 10 or 9 spot. You're probably not going to see them much higher. They both win fights and get to good spots like this in the rankings. They can both lose fights and fall out of the rankings just as fast. But this is the lightweight division for you. There's about 10 guys you could say that same thing about. And all of those guys, well, I shouldn't say all, a large majority of those guys are entertaining fighters. And I think Moicano and Dober are both entertaining fighters. And I think this is going to be a fun scrap.
Yeah, I would be completely. It seems like just on paper, typical wrestler versus striker kind of matchup. Moicano, he never had a knockout win, but has 10 submissions. Drew Dober's a little open to being submitted. He has 4 of his 12 losses have been by submission. So that's something I'm concerned about for Drew Dober. But he does get more finishes from the knockout side of things, and he has a lot of fights. So he's
Mhm.
fought so many different styles before. Obviously, took that Islam fight, made it to the third round with him, which was just impressive before being submitted. Beat Ricky Glenn the last time out. His last 4 or 5, God, his last 7 wins have all been by knockout. So he does still have that power, even being at 35 years old.
Yeah, and Drew Dober's a guy who, if you were just to skim his resume, there's a lot of talented fighters on there.
Yeah.
Like, even like the lightweight division is interesting because on his he fought Rafael Alves not too long ago. Won that fight by knockout, landed a beautiful body shot, and it's like Alves has since been cut from the promotion. But it's like that's because the lightweight division has so many good fighters and so many prospects. You can't really afford to keep a guy that's kind of middling like Alves around. Um, but he's like a good fighter, and like that is kind of the story of Drew Dober's career. It's like win or lose, he's probably fighting a good fighter, and he fights guys like Islam Makhachev. Like he didn't decline that fight; he could have easily said no when they offered him Islam, and I believe Islam was unranked at the time, if I remember correctly, and Dober was just similar spot he is now in that 13 to 15 range. So I give Dober a lot of credit for that. Renato Moicano is a guy who moved up a division, went from featherweight to lightweight, and has since improved a lot. He's picked up some big wins. Beat Brad Riddell, I believe, was his last win. He fought Rafael Fiziev. He fought Rafael Dos Anjos. So it's like he has also had a lot of tough fights in his career. So I think this is really interesting. But to me, the deciding factor is Drew Dober's power. And you said he won his last however many fights. I believe you said 7
Yeah.
by knockout. And that is, I think, that's the direction I'm leaning here is Dober by knockout. Renato Moicano, you get in the pocket, and that defense is a little bit iffy. He's been knocked out before, and he's a great grappler, but I think he could struggle to get this to the ground. Doesn't have elite takedowns. If he does land a takedown or multiple takedowns, wouldn't be surprised if he submits Drew Dober. At the same time, wouldn't be surprised if Dober knocks him out. My pick is Dober KO, but this is volatile fight. Either guy could win this fight by finish relatively early.
Yeah, that's the one I'm leaning to. I see this kind of being like the Rafael Fiziev fight for Moicano. He got knocked out in that one in the first round. Obviously, I would say Fiziev is a lot better than Drew Dober all around, but this is earlier on in Fiziev's career, was back in 2020, so it's a lot's changed since then. But my big concern about Moicano is the fact that he hasn't fought since November 2022. That's a long layoff. We talk about it all the time with certain people. Some people are able to do it. We saw John Jones, but that's different. He's not John Jones. A long layoff isn't usually the best thing when you got to go and when you go and face a striker. If you're facing another wrestler, grappler, maybe, but you got to be used to getting punched a lot. And a year and a half off almost, or a year and a couple months off is quite a long time.
Yep. And though the reason he was off was because of injuries. I believe he had a knee injury there, so it's not like he's been training for a year and a half. It's like, when you have surgery on your knee, you don't get to go in there and spar. Meanwhile, in that time period, we've seen Dober get knocked out by Matt Frivola, come back and get a win. So it's like he's had his own struggles, but we've seen him kind of bounce back from his struggles. And Moicano is maybe he bounces back in this fight. It's not impossible, but you have a little bit more trust in Drew Dober, considering he just went out there and got back in the win column, so that's always a positive. But Moicano winning wouldn't be the worst thing because I know he has gained a lot of fans because after his after I believe it was his Brad Riddell fight, that's when he got on the mic and said Moicano wants money, and everybody loved it. Yeah. So Moicano has a growing fan base, and if either of these guys can win, and it wouldn't be that bad of an outcome for the UFC or for the fans. So I think this is just going to be an entertaining co-main event. The fans either way get a good show. So I think this is a good fight.
I will say this is looking a little ahead, but I see a perfect matchup for the winner of this is a guy like Dan Hooker.
Mm-hmm.
I think that'd be a very good one to try and break into that top 10. So this is one that kind of gets you one step closer to the top 10. And a very, 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 very difficult division.
Yep, I'm with you on that. I like that call. All right, moving down the card, we have Randy Brown and Muslim Salikhov. This is a fight, the unranked fight, but it is above a ranked fight on the card. Whatever, I don't make the bout order. But I do think this will be a fun and entertaining fight. Randy Brown and Muslim Salikhov, two guys that have been around the UFC, both a decent bit of experience. Muslim Salikhov, a lot of experience outside of the UFC. Interesting background. He was originally a Sanda practitioner, which is a form of Chinese kickboxing. And that translates to fun UFC fights. He's got some spinning kicks, and he uses them pretty well. Randy Brown, long striker, emphasis on the long, 6'3", and he uses his length well. So I think this is going to be a really interesting fight. I think we get probably 15 minutes of a relatively close striking fight. And I think this is going to be a fun fight, and I think that's why it's has this card placement.
Yeah, and you talk about long. Randy Brown has a 10-inch reach advantage, or almost a 10-inch reach advantage on Salikhov. So that's something that if he can keep the distance and kind of jab away and use his leg kicks and all that, could be a long night for the Russian.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. It's hard to count out a guy like Salikhov. He has lost 2 of his last 3, knocked out. Then he came back with a knockout win over Andre Fiallo, lost a decision to Nicholas Dalby in June last year. So it's
and I will say those losses, if you look at Dalby, he just beat one of the Bonfim brothers, and he's trending upwards.
Li Jing Liang, who him be a killer.
Yeah, and he's looked very good as well. So he's lost 2 of his last 3, but that's like a lot of guys lose 2 of those 3 fights, for being honest.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Randy Brown beat Wellington Thurman out last time out. Wow, words are hard. By decision, but he was submitted by Jack Della Maddalena previously. So it's one of those things that he's also has good losses. Lost to Vicente Luque, Bilal Muhammad.
A lot of experience on the Randy Brown side for being the younger fighter. Fought some high-level guys like Bilal, Luque, both great examples of that.
Yeah, I mean, there are other names out. Chinaldo, Alex Oliveira. Got some veterans he's fought, and I think that might be the benefit for him. And the fact that he has gone the distance kind of more often than Salikhov has. Both of them have 1 loss, but it's 6 wins for Randy, 4 for Muslim. I don't know. I'm leaning towards Randy Brown in a decision, but mostly because, like you said, that length is going to be an advantage. And I think Salikhov might get a little too reckless with his kickboxing and stand-up game.
Yeah, my prediction is I also like Randy Brown. I think he's just going to stay on the outside. Here's my jab. Here's my straight. Here's a kick to the body for 3 rounds, outpoint him for 3 rounds. I could see Salikhov having, he throws hard leg kicks. Randy Brown, he's taller, so those legs aren't the thickest. So maybe that's an area where Salikhov can have success. Maybe he crashes the pocket a little bit, gets inside. Maybe he mixes in some takedowns. He kind of shoots more often than you'd expect for a kickboxer. So I think it's going to be a close fight, but I do lean Randy Brown. I think he controls a lot of this fight with his length. The question will be, can Salikhov have big enough moments when he's not being controlled from a distance? When he crashes into the pocket, can he land big enough shots to kind of swing the momentum in his favor? Do takedowns edge a close round from Randy to Salikhov? So there's a path to victory for Salikhov, but I'm going to lean with the younger guy. I'm probably more experienced in MMA, but not more experienced if you take in Salikhov's Sanda experience. So, but I do like Brown here, and it should be a relatively interesting fight.
Yes, it will be. For 2 unranked guys, this could be a very, very good war. I think it could be a potential fight of the night candidate if they go at each other. It's one of those things that I can see him keeping a distance, but also if they get into those pockets and just start throwing hands and kicks and knees, it could be entertaining as hell.
Yep, I'm with you. And I have my pick for fight of the night. But I will share that a little bit when we do our shout outs to the prelims and the rest of the card. I've got a pick for fight of the night, so I will share it here in a little bit. But before we get to that, we have Natalia Silva and Viviane Araujo. This is a big fight for Natalia Silva. She's got one ranked win under her belt, 4-0 in the UFC. Kind of turning into a blue chip prospect. That may be a little bit aggressive for Natalia, but I really like Natalia Silva. And this is a big opportunity for her. And I just want to say this about Natalia Silva. I've been in on her from the jump, and she has only impressed in the UFC. Started off really tough matchups against Jasmine Judah Vicious and Teresa Bleda. She went out there defensively grappled against them, and then her stand up is legit.
Yeah.
Great kicks, quick hands. I mean, she's got a lot of tools, mixes up those tools well. I really, really like Natalia Silva and think she can do big things. So I'm really excited for this matchup against a highly ranked fighter in Viviane Araujo.
Yeah, I'm with you. She's very, very entertaining. Can finish on the ground, finish standing. 7 submissions, 5 knockouts. So it's one of those things that she can finish you everywhere. And it seems like Viviane Araujo is kind of on that back end of her career at 37 years old. She's won one of her last or 2 of her last 5 against Jennifer Maia and Andrea Lee, which aren't the biggest names anymore. Did lose to Amanda Ribas, Alexa Grasso, Caitlin Chukagian. So losing to good top talent, but I just think it's Talia Silva's time to kind of start moving up these rankings, and I think she poses a threat everywhere, unlike Araujo, who hasn't had a finish since 2019.
Yeah. I hasn't
been finished either, though, so I'll say that.
Yeah. And what concerns me about Araujo is, in theory, she should be a fighter that gets finishes.
Mm-hmm.
She's a grappler with a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background. You should be submitting girls at some point. On the feet, she hits very hard and has a physicality advantage much stronger than a lot of the girls she fights. Those two things should lead her to finishing fights at. I'm not saying she should finish every fight, but there should be some finishing mixed in. Her last finish should not be in 2019. So that is a fairly big concern for me on the Araujo side. And I really struggled to see a path to victory for her in this matchup because we've seen Natalia Silva have good defensive wrestling. She got in a squirrely position against Teresa Bleda, where Bleda had a deep triangle. So maybe her submission defense isn't up to par. But the takedown defense is. And the thing about Araujo is if she goes out there and offensively grapples early and can't land a takedown and land a submission, she gasses every time she grapples. And if you gas against Natalia Silva's got good cardio. She's going to stand up, kick you in the body, and then kick you in the head, and then punch it 4 times, and all of a sudden you're beat up pretty badly. And then if you go out there and just strike with Natalia Silva, she's going to counter Viviane Araujo all day long, or she's going to pick her apart from distance. So if it's a brawl, Araujo's going to get countered. If it's not a brawl, it's just going to be Natalia point fighting. Here's a kick to the leg. Here's a kick to the body. Here's a kick to the head. Here's a 2-punch combo. She's going to throw a bunch of volume very quick. She's going to land a lot. So I struggled to carve out a path to victory for Araujo, barring here's an overhand. I caught you with your chin up. I mean, that's always possible in fighting. Maybe she lands that quick submission, but overall, I really, really struggled to highlight a path to victory for Araujo and think Natalia wins this fight. I don't think she's going to clean her quickly because it's, she doesn't hit the hardest, but I believe she'll get an accumulation knockout late in this fight. So I'm really heavy on Natalia Silva here. And like I said earlier, I do really like her as a fighter. That's just kind of goes with the territory.
Yeah, it's gonna be a fun one. I'm definitely thinking of the same things. I'm thinking Silva takes this one. Can see it being a finish, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm. And if you could not tell, I already wrote my preview for that fight. That's why I had so many thoughts on it, because I already wrote the preview, had every single thought of how this fight could go in my head. So wrote the preview on that one. And this is also a good time to plug Vendetta Sports Media UFC previews. which we post every Friday, that has myself and Jerry's UFC predictions. I preview the fights. Everyone sends me their predictions. Anthony and Garrett's will be in there as well. So you can get our final predictions on the entire main card. So make sure you guys are checking those out as well. And if you like the podcast, you will probably like those. I go a little bit deeper into techniques and stuff like that in that. So that is a good read for anyone that is this deep in the podcast. You'll probably like reading that as well. Shameless plug.
Right.
For the
Yeah,
preview.
go check that out. Oh, that's
all
good.
right. Yeah. All right. And then last thing here on UFC Vegas 85 is some shout outs. So I like doing this. I think this is a good way to kind of get a couple more quick thoughts in without diving in too deep. I do really like doing this, and somehow I forget very often, but I remembered today. Shout outs for the rest of the card. I will let you go first. What is something that really stands out to you this card, whether it be the main event or first fight on the prelims that you want to shout out?
One guy who I'm looking forward to seeing because he's only fought once in the UFC, but he's 17-0 with 12 finishes as a flyweight. We don't see that much power and that much skill at times from flyweights. Is Azat Maksum from Kazakhstan. He's fighting Charles Johnson, who's 13-6. So I think this could be another finish, but I'm just curious to see how this 17-0 guy does.
Yep, I think that is a good call. I'm going the prospect route as well. Landon Quinones and Markel Medeiros. This is my potential fight of the night that I teased earlier. I liked Medeiros on Dana White Contender Series. I think he's got some skill. Landon Quinones is a guy who took a short notice opportunity in the UFC and has made the most of it with entertaining fights. And now we've got two guys who have some promise duking it out here on the prelims. Two strikers, so I think this turns into an entertaining fight. And maybe we see a new prospect emerge in this lightweight division if either of these guys have an impressive performance. So that's where I'm going for my shutout.
Yeah, I like that shout. That should be a fun fight.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then moving on, next thing we're talking about UFC 300. Last week we talked about UFC 300. This week we have even more UFC 300 news, and we've got 3 fight bookings. One of them includes a signing. We're going to start with the biggest news. Kayla Harrison has signed with the UFC, and she will fight Holly Holm. Jay, what are your reactions to Kayla Harrison signing with the UFC, and what do you make of this being the first matchup for her?
I think it's very interesting, her coming to the UFC. It's been in talks for a while, it seems like, but it's always been that, she's fighting in the PFL, is under contract there. It's kind of running through people there, and it helped that they had a lightweight division, fighting at 155, and that brings up my one big concern for Kayla Harrison is how well is she going to cut weight? Because she's going to be fighting at 135, which is obviously 20 pounds lighter than what she fought at in the PFL. That could take a toll on you. And against someone like Holly Holm, I know Holm's on kind of the back end of her career as well and maybe won't have that many more. I think if she was to get a win, she would probably retire. But it's still someone you cannot sleep on at all. Still dangerous striker that can put your lights out whenever. So it's going to be a very interesting matchup. I'm excited for that. I'm just concerned of how the weight cut will affect Kayla Harrison because we've never seen her at this light of a weight.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think it's interesting that this comes a week after we talk about the 135-pound title, the title fight being not that great of a fight between Mayra Buenasova and Raquel Pennington. So I hope Kayla Harrison can make the weight. And if she can, then I think we have a potential fun champion for this weight class. But I do have, it's not a guarantee, obviously. She did lose in the PFL to Larissa Pacheco. That was at a much higher weight. So if she can make 135, some of those concerns do go away. But yeah, I think Holly Holm is a pretty fair first matchup. There's a lot of girls in this 135 division that you could give to Kayla Harrison, and she'd be a minus 1,000 favorite. I don't know what she's going to be in this matchup, but I think it's going to be a much tighter matchup than some others you could find. So I think it's a good matchup. And if you beat Holly Holm, you are in a pretty good spot in this division. So I like this matchmaking, and I think Kayla Harrison was a good free agent to sign, especially considering where we currently sit with the talent at 135 pounds compared to the other two women's divisions. So I do like seeing an influx of new talent. I think that could be a positive.
Yeah, and I do think if Kayla can cut down the weight pretty easily, which I'm sure she's been preparing for this, so it wouldn't surprise me all that much. She has stuff that no other lady in that division has in terms of her judo background, her grappling skills. She's 6 submissions, 6 knockouts, so can get it done either way. It's someone who could be very dangerous. And hey, who knows? Maybe this is the fighter that would bring Amanda Nunes back out of retirement in the future. I don't know if Nunes is planning on doing that. I know there were rumors last week or 2 weekends ago about that, but hey.
Yeah. Nunes, who knows what's going on with that, but she, usually when you ask a retired fighter, hey, we're going to see a fight again, you expect oh, no, I'm done. But that was not the answer from Nunes. So, to be fair, if I was Nunes and I saw that title performance, I'd go, I can come back, get paid, and fight them. All right, fair enough. My toughest fight's going to be Juliana Pena. Sign me up.
Did that one twice already, and the second time is probably how the third time would have gone.
Yep, I'm 100% with you. All right. Next fight on the card, Sodiq Yusuff versus Diego Lopes. This is Diego Lopes, a guy that is quickly gaining steam in the UFC. He kind of seemed like an underground favorite where comes in, fights Movsar Evelev. Everyone gets excited about his performance. Didn't win, but he made the fight exciting. Gets 2 big wins afterwards. Now all of a sudden, here he is on UFC 300. Here he is fighting a ranked opponent, Sodiq Yusuff. What do you make of the rise of Diego Lopes so far in the UFC?
I think it's very, very fair. I mean, that Evelev fight he took on short notice, I would say, and had virtually no right in really even being in there and competing at that level with a guy who just came out and wiped the floor with the number 3 ranked featherweight in the world. So I think he deserves all the props he's getting. He is a fun, entertaining fighter. I like this fight. I like that there's some guys who I don't like how the UFC will push them this quickly, but I think this is a guy who is ready for the pressure, ready for the starlight, and can handle it completely.
Yeah, and I think it helps that we saw him in there with a guy who is now in the top 5, and he looked like he belonged in there with him. A lot of times those short replacements come in and you go, oh, this guy doesn't belong in the octagon with the fighter that he's in there with. This was not one of those cases, and I think that speaks a lot about what he can do in the UFC. And this is just another name in this featherweight division that is a deep division, and I'm excited to see what he can do. And on the Sodiq Yusuff side of things, Sodiq Yusuff is a guy I really like. I think he's very talented. He's not, he doesn't have the cleanest record, but he's got losses to Barbosa and Arnold Allen, 2 guys that I hold in high regard, and probably gassed out a little bit too much in the first round against Barbosa because he was trying to finish him. And, that first round was 10-8, arguably 10-7 against Barbosa. So Sodiq Yusuff is a dangerous guy as well. This is not a layup for Diego Lopes, and these are 2 exciting fighters. So you throw them on UFC 300, I think you just added a great fight to the card. This is one where, if you have casual fans tuning in, the first fight of the prelims, and they're watching the whole entire card, this fight comes on, and maybe you've never watched UFC before and you don't know who Sodiq Yusuff and Diego Lopes are, but this is probably going to be a fight that they watch and enjoy. So I think that is a very important type of fight to have on UFC 300. And both these guys are probably going to put on a good fight.
And on that note, looking at what they've done in the past, you mentioned how Sodiq Yusuff came out crazy in that first round last time. Diego Lopes' last 2 fights, a minute 30 and a minute 38 in the first round. So for casual fans tuning in just to watch, this is one that is going to be high energy, high action from the get-go, and one that probably won't see a second round.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised if we saw a second round in this one. Right. And the last matchup that got booked, this was the most recent one. It was Jessica Andrade and Marina Rodriguez. Jessica Andrade, like the definition of a veteran and pioneer in women's MMA, former champion, has a ridiculous amount of fights under her belt. Fights at 115, fights at 125. She's coming off a win over Mackenzie Dern, where she beat up Dern pretty badly.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I'm surprised that they made this fight, but this is a fight where it may not be the best fight on the card, but I think this is going to actually be an entertaining matchup between two girls that are going to go out there, two heavy strikers, and they're probably going to trade. Maybe we see a knockout, maybe we don't, but these are two aggressive fighters.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Marina Rodriguez, 7 knockouts, Jessica Andrade, 10 knockouts. So they will come out and probably be swinging. Both of them got the TKO knockout victory last time out. I think this also lines up pretty well for the rest of the division. I think that's why I like this fight so much. We have Wei Li fighting Yan in this what's likely to be the co-main event for the strawweight title. A win on this undercard could very well be what either of these two need to propel them to another title shot in Andrade's case, or a title shot for Rodriguez, because they're ranked 4 and 6.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things. Obviously, Amanda Lemos, Tatiana Suarez potentially could have a argument of why they should be for the next title shot. But this, you come out and make a massive statement on UFC 300, could be very, very beneficial.
Yeah, and off the back of that, Tatiana Suarez is also injured.
Yeah.
She's someone who everyone wants to see fight for a title. She's injured. We'll see how long that recovery takes. Unfortunately, Tatiana is someone who is injured more often than she's not. It sucks, but that's the reality. So, you're one Tatiana injury away from jumping her in, a title race.
Yeah.
So, and on top of that, when you're looking at this division, Wei Li has fought a couple of these fighters, and if you're purely trying to book a fun fight, the winner of this fight versus Wei Li is probably an entertaining fight. Like, it's not going to take much to sell people on Wei Li versus Andrade and Wei Li versus Marina Rodriguez. I believe she's actually already fought Andrade, so it would be a rematch.
It lasted a whole 42 seconds when Wei Li won the belt for the first time.
That's an impressive performance. That was in China, and Wei Li ran through Andrade.
I will still say I wish we were getting this Wei Li and Yan fight in China. I just think that would have been crazy. But hey, 300 Vegas ain't a bad place to have it either.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's kind of reflective of. I think it's tough for the UFC to go to China right now. They tried with Song Yadong, and it was supposed to be Peter Yan, and that fell through. You never really know why it falls through. But I think it's hard for the UFC to go to China right now, and that's probably why this is happening in the US. Otherwise, that fight would have been a great, like what the UFC did with the Mexican Independence Day show, where they had a fight night where Shevchenko and Grasso fought for free. Massive crowd, great fight, great card. You could do that over in China as well, but logistically, maybe it's just not working right now.
Yeah, 100% agree with that.
All right. And then the last thing here, we are going right through this episode. Frankie Edgar inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame at UFC 297. We missed it last week, but today is a good time to touch on that. What do you make of Frankie Edgar being the first fighter inducted into the Hall of Fame class this year?
I think he deserves it very much so. Sure, he's lost 5 of his last 6, 6 of his last 7, or 6 of his last 8. Hey, that doesn't matter. He was the champion for a while and fought some of the best lightweights, best featherweights in the world. He very well deserved it. And I think if anyone's sitting here seeing what he's done and smiling, I know he never really had a full title, but he had the interim belt, is Tony Ferguson. Shows that you can still make the Hall of Fame even if the back half of your career kind of falters. So, But I think very well deserved. Congratulations to Frankie Edgar. Looked very happy walking around at 297.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in you don't hold a fighter's downfall against them.
Yeah.
This isn't like the NFL where, one bad year and you're out of the league when you're 35. This is like, you get ran back out there a couple times. And for some guys, it has to do with money. I'm not saying Frankie was that way, but some guys go out there more often than they should because they need the money. Um, some guys don't know when to call it quits. It's just a different game, and you're going to have fighters that lose a lot at the end of their career. So I don't think that should be held against anyone when they're being inducted in the Hall of Fame. And you're looking at Frankie, very unique career. Um, One of the things, well, I guess the most important thing is he won the lightweight belt, and I think he has three defenses, with which ties him with Habib and a couple others for the most defenses in lightweight history. So that's already a big accomplishment in itself. But then he goes down to 45. He never wins that belt, but he fights for interim gold once and undisputed gold once. And then he goes down to 35 and fought the best fighters at 35. And it's like, we just do not see a guy work from 55 to 45 to 35, make all three weight classes. That also, the fact that he could make 35 says a lot about him being smaller than everyone when he won the belt at 55. Deserves credit for that as well. So this ended up being a great career, a very unique career. And I think Frankie Edgar deserves all the flowers he gets. I think he is a great fighter to be the first guy inducted into the Hall of Fame class this year. And we'll probably see some more. Logistically, I don't know. They don't really tell you who's up or to, there's no voting. They just kind of name people. And you never know, like a guy like Robbie Lawler will be a UFC Hall of Famer more than likely. Does he get inducted this year, next year? There's some logistical things that you just can't really predict. But I imagine we're going to see a handful of guys make it this year. And I think Frankie Edgar is a good first name to kind of be the face of this class.
Yeah, and we've already talked about how tough of guys he's fought, and there wasn't many guys tougher than Frankie Edgar. Just looking at his last three fights, flying knee, highlight knockout against him within 20 something seconds, then front kicked to oblivion. Still kept coming back. Still got one more fight in. Sure, he got TK or knocked out again there, but that just shows it. He will get knocked down, knocked out, and he'll still keep coming right back for more.
And if you look at the guys he fought, even in the latter stages of his career, he fought Sandhagen. He fought at 45. He fought Aldo and Max. He fought Cheeto at the end of his career as well. So it's like he fought Korean Zombie. It's like he fought Korean Zombie in Korea. It's like he took every single fight. And also, the trilogy with Gray Maynard is one of the most entertaining trilogies in UFC history. So he possibly could be in the running to get in again with a fight, get inducted into the fight wing of the UFC Hall of Fame. So Frankie Edgar, just about every way you cut it, deserves it. And like you said, he's as tough as they come, willing to fight anybody. So he deserves a lot of credit because he had a great career and was in the UFC for a very, very long time.
And had it not been for Benson Henderson and Jose Aldo, he could have very well been an even more decorated champion.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're going down there to 145 and you got to beat Aldo to get the belt. Like
this is peak Aldo as well.
Yeah, there's divisions where you can win a belt and maybe you didn't win it over the best guy, but like if history works out just a tad bit differently, there's a path for him to win that 45 belt and be a double champ. Unfortunately, you run into a top 10, arguably top 5 fighter of all time in Jose Aldo, and it just doesn't go your way. So still, outstanding career from Frankie Edgar.
Absolutely.
All right. That is everything on the agenda for today. A little bit of a shorter episode, but I think that makes sense considering we didn't have a card last week, so a little bit less to talk about. Next week, we'll be back breaking down this fight card that we just talked about. We'll talk about the notables, and we will return as well with a preview of the 2 week. It's now 2 weekends away card, headlined by Joe Pyfer and Jack Hermanson. Not the best card, honestly, so we're probably not going to talk about that many fights on that card. Maybe 1 or 2 we will preview. But next week, we'll do our previews. We'll do our recaps of the fights that matter the most. All fights matter. We'll do the ones that matter the most. And any breaking news, I think we're going to be pretty consistently staying in on UFC 300 fight news until that card is filled out. So I imagine some way, shape, or form, we talk about UFC 300 next week, and hopefully we're talking about the main event or another title fight.
Absolutely. I think it's inevitable. It's coming in the next couple weeks. It's just a matter of time, and still have no idea who the hell they're going to have as that main event. But hey, make sure you guys tune in each week so you find out.
Yep. Every week we're going to be saying UFC. Hopefully we get to UFC 300 main event. Hopefully we get it, and then so we can talk about it, and we'll see if we actually get it.
The weekend ahead of April 13th, we'll be like, breaking news. We have the UFC 300 main event. Here we go. Short notice fight. Let's get it.
Yep. And also, thank you to everyone who sticks with us here through some of these fight night cards that may not be the best. But coming forward, it's going to heat up real fast with high-level pay-per-views. So show is only going up from here.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, guys.